Pause for a moment. Before we begin, answer this question honestly. In the comments below, write yes or no. Did Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, the woman who seduced Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, who ruled the richest kingdom in the ancient world, who nearly challenged Rome itself for supremacy, did she actually marry her own brother? Not a political alliance, not a symbolic partnership, an actual marriage, with vows, with consummation, with everything that word implies. Yes or no? Write your answer now, before you know the truth, because what you're about to discover will make you question how much we've sanitized history, how much we've turned horror into legend, how much we've forgotten about what was once considered perfectly normal. The answer will disturb you, not because it's shocking by ancient standards, but because for 3,000 years, no one thought to question it. Cleopatra XII Philopata married not one brother, but two, Ptolemy XIII, when she was 18, and he was 10, Ptolemy XIV, when she was 22 and he was 12. These were legal marriages, consummated marriages, documented in official records that survive to this day. The question is not whether she married her brothers. The question is why this was not only permitted but required by law. This is that story. The Nile Delta shimmered under the Mediterranean sun in 51 BCE. Ptolemy XII Olates lay dying in the royal palace at Alexandria. He had ruled Egypt for nearly 30 years through bribery, Roman intervention, and the murder of his own daughter. His will was read before the court. The document had been deposited in Rome for safekeeping. The pharaoh of Egypt did not trust his own capital to preserve his final wishes. The will named two heirs: Cleopatra, his daughter, age 18, Ptolemy XIII, his son, age 10. They were to rule jointly as co-monarchs. They were to marry immediately upon their father's death. This was not a suggestion. This was not a political arrangement that could be negotiated. This was law. This was tradition. This was how the Ptolemaic dynasty had maintained power for 300 years. Brother married sister, generation after generation, for 3 centuries. The family tree was not a tree. It was a circle that looped back on itself again and again. The marriage ceremony took place within days of Ptolemy XII's death. We have no detailed account of the event. We do not know what words were spoken. We do not know what Cleopatra thought as she stood beside a 10-year-old boy and became his wife. We know only that it happened, that it was legal, that it was required. The Ptolemaic dynasty began with conquest. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BCE, his empire shattered. His generals became kings. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted commanders, took Egypt. Ptolemy XIV declared himself pharaoh. He adopted Egyptian titles and Egyptian religious practices. He built temples to Egyptian gods, but he remained Greek. His court spoke Greek. His army was Greek. His administration was Greek. The native Egyptian population outnumbered the Greek rulers by hundreds to one. The Ptolemies needed legitimacy. They needed the Egyptian priesthood to accept them. They needed the people to see them as true pharaohs, not foreign occupiers. So they adopted the most sacred tradition of pharaonic Egypt, sibling marriage. The ancient pharaohs had married their sisters. The gods themselves had done so. Osiris married Isis, his sister. Their union produced Horus, the divine king. The pattern was sacred. The pattern justified earthly practice. For 3,000 years before the Ptolemies arrived, Egyptian pharaohs had occasionally married their sisters to prove their divine status. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler. He was a god incarnate. His blood was sacred. It could not be diluted through marriage to commoners. The Ptolemies took this practice and made it systematic. Every generation, every succession, brother married sister, uncle married niece. The family married itself to maintain the purity of the bloodline and the legitimacy of the claim. This had consequences. 300 years of inbreeding created genetic convergence. Cleopatra's ancestry traced back through 8 different paths to the same founding couple. Her genetic diversity was extremely limited. Ancient sources do not discuss defects in the Ptolemaic line. This silence is suspicious. Infant mortality was likely high. Stillbirths were probably common. Children with severe problems may have been quietly disposed of. Cleopatra herself was healthy and intelligent. Ancient sources describe her as speaking 9 languages fluently. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to learn Egyptian. This gave her a connection to the native population that her ancestors had never cultivated. But she was the product of generations of sibling marriage. Her parents were likely siblings. Her grandparents were likely siblings. This pattern extended back through the entire dynasty, and now she was required to continue it. The marriage to Ptolemy XIII was political necessity, dressed as sacred tradition. Cleopatra needed the marriage to be recognized as legitimate queen of Egypt. The Egyptian priesthood demanded it. The law required it. But Ptolemy XIII was 10 years old, a child. Cleopatra was 18, an adult by the standards of her time, educated, ambitious, ready to rule. The marriage was consummated. This was required for legal validity in the Ptolemaic system. Ancient sources do not discuss the intimate details, but they assume the marriage was real in every sense. They refer to Ptolemy XIII as Cleopatra's husband, not merely her co-ruler. What this meant in practice was clear. An 18-year-old woman shared a bed with a 10-year-old boy because the law demanded it. This was not scandalous in Ptolemaic Egypt. This was normal. This was expected. This was how legitimate pharaohs were made. Cleopatra took control of the government immediately. She issued coins showing only her image. She dated official documents by her regnal year alone. She made decisions without consulting her brother husband. Ptolemy XIII was 10 years old. He had advisors. 3 men controlled the boy king: Pothinus, the eunuch who managed the treasury; Theodotus, the rhetoric teacher; Achillas, the general who commanded the army. These men were not content to let Cleopatra rule while the boy king remained a figurehead. They had their own ambitions. They began undermining Cleopatra's authority. They convinced Ptolemy XIII that his sister wife was dangerous, that she was preparing to remove him from power. They were probably right. The royal marriage that was supposed to unite the kingdom instead split it in 2. Within 2 years, Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria. She went to Syria and began raising an army to fight her brother husband. Egypt descended toward civil war, a war between a sister and brother, between a wife and husband, between co-monarchs, whose marriage was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of conflict. But before the war could begin in earnest, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt. Caesar came pursuing Pompey the Great, his rival in Rome's civil war. When Pompey's ship approached Alexandria seeking sanctuary, Ptolemy XIII's advisors made a calculation. They had Pompey murdered on the beach and presented his severed head to Caesar as a gift. Caesar moved into the royal palace and declared he would mediate the dispute between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII. He summoned both monarchs to appear before him. Cleopatra was in Syria with her army. Coming to Alexandria openly meant passing through Ptolemy XIII's forces. It would be suicide. So she came secretly, smuggled into the city in a carpet or linen sack, delivered to Caesar's private chambers. She was 21 years old. Caesar was 52. By morning he had made his decision. He would support Cleopatra. Ptolemy XIII would be subordinated. When the boy king learned of this decision, he reportedly tore his crown from his head and threw it to the ground. He called Caesar a tyrant. He accused his sister wife of seducing the Roman to gain power. Alexandria erupted in violence. The Alexandrian War lasted 6 months. Caesar and Cleopatra were trapped in the palace district. Ptolemy XIII's forces controlled the city. Part of the great library of Alexandria burned. Thousands died in street fighting. Caesar sent for reinforcements. When the relief force arrived, the combined Roman army defeated Ptolemy XIII's forces outside Alexandria. The boy king drowned in the Nile during the retreat. He was 13 years old. Ancient sources say he fell from a boat while fleeing. His body was found days later wearing golden armor. Caesar displayed the corpse to prove the boy was dead. Cleopatra's first brother husband was gone. The marriage had lasted 3 years. It had ended in civil war and the death of a 13-year-old child. But the Ptolemaic system required a co-ruler. The tradition of joint monarchy was ancient. The priesthood demanded it. Cleopatra could not rule alone. She had one brother remaining, Ptolemy XIV. He was 12 years old. The marriage to Ptolemy XIV was arranged within weeks of Ptolemy XIII's death. There was no courtship, there was no negotiation, there was simply the transfer of royal marriage from one brother to the next. The system demanded it. Cleopatra complied. We know almost nothing about Ptolemy XIV as a person. He appears in historical records only as a name on official documents. He issued no decrees. He commanded no armies. He made no decisions. He was a legal fiction, whose only function was to legitimize Cleopatra's rule by existing. Coins were struck, showing both their images. Temples recorded offerings in both their names. Documents were dated in both their regnal years. But everyone understood the reality. Ptolemy XIV was powerless. Cleopatra ruled Egypt. Caesar ruled Cleopatra. Rome ruled everything. Cleopatra was pregnant with Caesar's child. She gave birth in June of 47 BCE. A boy, she named him Ptolemy Caesar. The people called him Caesarion, Little Caesar. The paternity was obvious, despite Caesar's refusal to acknowledge him publicly. In Egypt, Caesarion was the heir to the throne, the son of the pharaoh, and the son of Rome's most powerful man. This made him valuable. This made him dangerous. Caesar returned to Rome in 46 BCE. Cleopatra followed with Ptolemy XIV and Caesarion. She stayed in Caesar's villa across the Tiber for 2 years. This was scandalous. Caesar was married. Roman law forbade bigamy, yet he housed his foreign mistress and their child in his own property. Cleopatra was there when Caesar was named dictator for life. She was there when his enemies plotted against him. She was there on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, when Caesar was stabbed 23 times. She fled Rome immediately after the assassination. She took Ptolemy XIV and Caesarion and sailed back to Alexandria. Within weeks of her return, Ptolemy XIV was dead. The ancient sources say he died of natural causes. No ancient source believes this. He was 14 years old, healthy. He died suddenly without recorded illness. Cleopatra had him poisoned. This is the consensus of modern historians. She had no more use for a brother husband. She had a son. Caesarion would be her co-ruler now. She proclaimed him Ptolemy XV Caesar. She dated documents in both their names. She issued coins showing both their images. She ruled through her son as she had ruled through her brothers. But Caesarion was her child, not her brother, not her husband. The practice of sibling marriage had served its purpose. Now it was discarded. The question must be stated plainly. Were these real marriages? Yes, they were legally binding under Egyptian law and Ptolemaic custom. They conferred legitimate authority. They were recognized by the priesthood, the court, the population. Were they consummated? The evidence suggests yes, for Ptolemy XIII, uncertain for Ptolemy XIV. Ancient marriage required consummation for legal completion. Cleopatra needed these marriages to be legally valid. Legal validity required consummation. Plutarch and Cassius Dio, our primary sources, do not discuss intimate details. They focus on political implications. But both historians assume the marriages were real in every sense. They use the word husband for both brothers. The marriage to Ptolemy XIII began when he was 10. It lasted 3 years until his death at 13. During this time, Cleopatra was also conducting her relationship with Caesar. Ancient sources saw no contradiction. Ptolemaic queens had both husbands and lovers. The distinction was legal and political, not moral. The marriage to Ptolemy XIV began when he was 12. Cleopatra was 22 and pregnant with Caesar's child. This marriage lasted 3 years until Ptolemy XIV's death at 14. During this marriage, Cleopatra was openly living with Caesar. Again, ancient sources record no scandal. The marriage to Ptolemy XIV was about Egyptian legitimacy. The relationship with Caesar was about Roman power. The modern mind struggles with this. We want clear categories. We want to know if these were real marriages or merely political arrangements. We want to know if Cleopatra loved her brothers. These questions would have been incomprehensible to Cleopatra and her contemporaries. Love was irrelevant to royal marriage. Marriage was about dynasty, about legitimacy, about power. The physical reality remains. Cleopatra shared a bed with a 10-year-old boy because law required it. She was married to a child because the system demanded it. This was not unusual in the Ptolemaic dynasty. This was normal. This was expected. This was how pharaohs were made. Why did this happen? Why was sibling marriage not only permitted but required? The answer lies in the intersection of Greek ambition and Egyptian tradition. The Ptolemies were Greek conquerors, ruling an Egyptian population. They needed legitimacy. The Egyptian priesthood had crowned pharaohs for 3,000 years. They would not easily accept foreign rulers. So the Ptolemies adopted pharaonic custom. They took Egyptian throne names. They built Egyptian temples. They performed Egyptian rituals. And they married their siblings. This proved they were true pharaohs, not merely Greek occupiers. It satisfied the priesthood. It justified their rule to the native population. It maintained the fiction that they were divinely chosen. The practice also served internal political purposes. A Ptolemaic princess who married her brother became queen. A Ptolemaic princess who married a foreigner became nothing. The system channeled female ambition inward. It prevented foreign dynasties from claiming the throne through marriage. It also made brothers expendable. Ptolemaic history is filled with murdered brothers, poisoned brothers, brothers who drowned conveniently, brothers who died young under suspicious circumstances. Ptolemy XIII died at 13 in battle. Ptolemy XIV died at 14, likely poisoned. These deaths were politically convenient. These deaths were probably not accidents. The system that required sibling marriage also created conditions for sibling murder. When you teach children that their siblings are simultaneously their spouses and their rivals for power, you create impossible psychological tensions. When you maintain this pattern for 300 years, you create a dynasty that destroys itself. The Ptolemies murdered each other with regularity. Fathers killed sons, mothers killed daughters, siblings killed siblings. This violence was not incidental to the system. It was generated by the system. Cleopatra's older sister Berenice IV seized the throne and was executed by their father. Cleopatra's younger sister Arsinoe declared herself queen during the Alexandrian War and was later killed on Cleopatra's orders. Cleopatra's brother husband Ptolemy XIII died in suspicious circumstances. Cleopatra's brother husband Ptolemy XIV was almost certainly poisoned. This was the pattern across the entire dynasty. Ptolemy II had his brother executed. Ptolemy IV had his mother murdered. Ptolemy VIII married his niece, then married her daughter, then had the daughter murdered. The list goes on. The violence was systematic. It was structural. It emerged from a system that placed family members in impossible positions, required to marry each other, required to rule together, required to compete for power. The genetic consequences were severe. 300 years of inbreeding created a family with extremely limited genetic diversity. Modern analysis of the Ptolemaic family tree shows repeated convergence, the same ancestors appearing again and again through multiple lines. Cleopatra descended from Ptolemy I and Berenice I through 8 different paths. Her genetic diversity approached that of a person whose parents were siblings, whose grandparents were siblings, whose great-grandparents were siblings. That she was healthy and intelligent was remarkable. That she was brilliant enough to nearly preserve Egyptian independence against Rome was extraordinary. She was either extraordinarily fortunate genetically, or her mother was not Ptolemaic at all, but a concubine from outside the family. The uncertainty about her mother's identity may support the second explanation. If Cleopatra's mother was a concubine, Cleopatra was technically illegitimate by Ptolemaic standards, but it might also explain why she survived, where others with more pure bloodlines might have suffered genetic problems. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra allied with Mark Antony. She bore him 3 children, twins in 40 BCE, a son in 36 BCE. These children were legitimate by Egyptian law, illegitimate by Roman law. Antony was married to Octavian's sister at the time. The relationship scandalized Rome. Octavian used it as propaganda. He declared war on Cleopatra as a foreign queen who had corrupted a Roman general. The war was decided at Actium in 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Antony fled to Alexandria. Antony attempted suicide and died slowly in Cleopatra's arms. Octavian wanted Cleopatra alive to parade through Rome in chains. She chose death instead. The story of the asp is probably false. More likely she used poison. She had studied toxicology. She had access to deadly substances. She had loyal servants. The asp became legend because it was symbolic. The uraeus, the sacred cobra, was the symbol of Egyptian kingship. She died on August 12, 30 BCE. She was 39 years old. She had ruled Egypt for 21 years. She had outlived 2 brother husbands. She had borne 4 children to 2 Roman generals. Octavian had Caesarion killed. The boy was 17. With his death, the male Ptolemaic line ended. Cleopatra's children by Antony survived. Her daughter Cleopatra Selene eventually married and became Queen of Mauritania. The bloodline continued, but diluted now, merged with Roman and North African ancestry. Egypt became a Roman province. The Ptolemaic system was dismantled. The practice of sibling marriage among royalty ended. The temples fell silent. Did Cleopatra really marry her brothers? Yes, both of them. Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV. These were legal marriages recognized by Egyptian law. They were consummated marriages. They were real in every sense that mattered to ancient law and custom. She married Ptolemy XIII when she was 18 and he was 10. The marriage lasted 3 years until his death at 13. She married Ptolemy XIV when she was 22 and he was 12. The marriage lasted 3 years until his death, likely by poison, at 14. These marriages were not exceptional. They were not scandalous by the standards of Ptolemaic Egypt. They were required by law. They were necessary for legitimacy. They were how the system functioned. The horror is not in exceptional cruelty. The horror is in the mundane operation of a system that treated children as political instruments, that married them to adults because tradition required it, that killed them when they became inconvenient. Cleopatra was not a monster. She was a participant in a monstrous system, a system that had operated for 300 years before she was born, a system that would continue until Rome destroyed it. She married her brothers because the system demanded it. She ruled through them because the system permitted it. She had them killed, or allowed them to die, because the system rewarded it. She was following the rules. The rules were horror. The asp struck twice. Cleopatra died. The system died with her. She died having done everything that system required, including marrying her brothers, including maintaining the fiction of joint rule while holding actual power, including eliminating threats to her authority, even when those threats were children. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended with her death. 300 years of sibling marriage, 300 years of genetic convergence, 300 years of systematic violence within a royal family that married itself. Egypt became Roman. The practice of sibling marriage faded from the Mediterranean world. The tradition died, but the facts remain, preserved in ancient texts, carved in stone, stamped on coins, documented in official records that survive to this day. Cleopatra married her brothers. This is not legend. This is not exaggeration. This is verified history. An 18-year-old woman married a 10-year-old boy because law demanded it. A 22-year-old woman married a 12-year-old boy because tradition required it. Both boys died in their early teens under circumstances that benefited their sister wife. This was legal. This was normal. This was the system functioning as designed. The question is not whether it happened. The question is how a civilization convinced itself that this was necessary, that this was right, that this was divine will. The answer is power. Power to maintain a dynasty. Power to preserve legitimacy. Power to control Egypt's wealth and resources. Power worth any price, including the price of marrying children to adults and calling it sacred tradition. Cleopatra married her brothers because the world she lived in demanded it. We remember this because we no longer live in that world, because we have traveled some distance from a time when such practices were law. The answer to the question is yes. Simple, documented, undeniable. Cleopatra really married her brothers, both of them, and that should disturb us.